Today it's our distinct pleasure to be speaking with Dr. Craig M. Gay, author of the text that we'll be discussing today, Modern Technology and the Human Future, a Christian Appraisal, and professor of interdisciplinary studies at Regent College in Vancouver. Dr. Gay, thank you so much for being with us today.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
Dr. Gay, as we begin, you confront the dark potential in the rise of technology. If I can read just a sentence from your book on page 2, you write, modern technologies have unquestionably increased productivity, making new material freedoms possible, but they have also seemed to undermine the prudence we require to exercise these freedoms wisely and judiciously. What led you to write this book?
Well, the book comes out of a long-standing interest that I have had in trying to understand where we are and what's going on. When I use a single word to describe that interest, I use the word modernity. But my job as professor of interdisciplinary studies at Regent College has basically been trying to help students to understand where we are and what's going on. And technology obviously comes up. Now, more specifically, the book arose out of a course that I've been teaching at Regent College for quite a number of years. I was trying to remember for how long, but it's been at least 10, called Christianity and Modern Technology. And I think the book also has arisen just because I've become concerned myself about where our technologies seem to be taking us. So personal interest also figures into this.
Mm-hmm. What do you see, if I can just ask a curiosity question, what do you see as the most significant technological innovation of your lifetime?
That was a great question. I thought about that. I think if you expand my lifetime just a little bit, maybe extend it back to around 1950, I'd have to say that it's the advent of the digital computer, which I have forgotten exactly, how this is dated. But even more specifically, and this is definitely within my lifetime, is the advent of the microprocessor. And then following on from this, the networking of digital computers.
It's very clear from your book that you are concerned about the potential abuse of technology. Was there any particular moment in your own development where this heightened concern became awakened?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I can't remember any specific event or time. No, it's just been a feeling I've had, especially probably over the last 10 or 15 years, about the impact of, I mean, if anything, it's been the experience of raising kids in this new world of digital technology and screens and iPhones and, and so forth. And the challenges that that's posed. But no, no single event that I can point to.
Great. Dr. Gay, you speak throughout the book of the, quote, automatic machine technologies. Would you be willing to help us understand precisely what you mean by this phrase?
Yeah, and I don't know that it's the best phrase. I use the word machine in the sense that these are technologies and systems that take advantage of modern science and modern scientific findings to very carefully adjust means to ends. And these are systems that, in a sense, use nature, including human beings, to accomplish human purposes. Now, the word automatic just simply says that the machines and machine systems have been designed and developed to function automatically, which is simply to say unimpeded as much as possible by human frailty and human failing. And what this means in practice today is that these are machines and machine systems that have been augmented and amplified by digital computers.
Dr. Gay, is modern technology merely a tool? And by that I mean a tool by which we can do good or evil, a tool by which we can cause life to flourish or be diminished? Or is modern technology inherently bent towards good or evil outcomes? What's your view?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I'm gonna bend it in a slightly different direction, and this is the sort of the line I take in the book, and I'm following. Well, I cite the philosopher Martin Heidegger, but also others who have argued that the essence of modern technology is not really technology per se, but rather it's an outlook. It's a way of being in the world in which we imagine the world as a kind of vast machine uh, comprised of objects, or quite literally of stuff, that we are free to put to use as we see fit. And within this worldview, we do talk about good or evil outcomes, but how the words good and evil are defined is basically up to us. The terms are simply relative to human desiring and to the human exercise of power. And I think that's a big problem. It seems to me that before we can even begin to really answer the questions about the development and use of modern technologies, we're going to need to begin from within an entirely different way of being in the world, one that understands the world as a creation that is not ours to simply use and re-engineer as we see fit, but rather as a creation that has been given to us to love and to steward. Now, so long as we continue to view the world as simply stuff, as stuff that we are free to use, and so long as we continue to believe that we can use this stuff that we find in the world more or less as we see fit, I don't think we'll stand much of a chance of redirecting modern technology to more humane and fruitful ends. Now, put somewhat differently, I think we stand no chance of being able to satisfactorily answer the kinds of questions currently being put to us in respect to modern technological development unless we first know where we are, who we are, and the kinds of people that God desires us to become. So that's how I would spin that question. It's really a question more about us than it is about the technologies as such.
So what I hear you saying, and please correct me or help redefine this, what I hear you saying is that it will be impossible for us to use technology morally from a materialistic worldview. Am I oversimplifying your position?
Yeah, I mean, I'd have to think about just how to condense the sentiment down to the least possible number of words, but our development of modern technology emerges out of a worldview, out of a way of seeing the world and of seeing ourselves within the world. And any real and meaningful correction to modern technological development I think is going to need to come from a fundamentally different way of seeing the world and of viewing the human purposes within the world. Now, yes, it's true. I would reject materialism along those lines. It's not a word I use very often, but certainly a world that is closed to God is not one that I think will fruitfully enable us to answer any of these questions, especially about good and evil.
Dr. Gay, in your book, you note that, quote, modern technology has by and large developed within the matrix of capitalism. You state that on page 81. What does this reality say about the role that modern technology should or should not play in Christian life?
Well, I mean, I was thinking about this. Let me just say a couple of things. I think it tells us in the first instance that we ought to be skeptical of what Albert Borgman, who's the fellow I cite in the book, calls the promise of technology to improve the quality of our lives. Of course, that's a promise that we hear a lot about. And of course, it might be true. Some of the technologies might improve the quality of our lives, but of course, this promise is usually made by people who stand to profit from our use and consumption of their products. And it's just, I think we need to take this with a grain of salt. I think it also tells us that the entire drift of modern technological development is not necessarily toward making the world a better place. Again, it might in certain respects. I mean, it has. I mean, there's no argument about that in many respects. But modern technologies are designed, developed, and deployed primarily to make money. Full stop. That's why people devote themselves to doing this work. For the most part. I mean, there are always exceptions to that. But that's just something to keep in mind. So I guess to summarize that sentiment, the word to Christians would simply be take care. Mammon lurks behind the modern technological system.
Dr. Gay, I find the technology of technological optimist very helpful. I do not identify as a technological optimist. That is one who thinks that technology is going to improve the fundamental human condition. And yet, of course, technology has lots of applications that we do use all the time. What do you make of this language, technological optimism or pessimism?
Well, I don't like it. I mean, I don't think it's very useful. I mean, I don't like the terms optimism and pessimism. I don't think they're not Christian terms. They don't express Christian sentiments. My own sense is that and I borrow this phrase from my friend Jim Packer, who said that Christian ethics is always about making the best of a bad situation. And, I think that's the situation we're in. We're obviously grateful for many of the technologies and technological systems that we are involved in and surrounded by. But at the same time, we're aware that things can always be made better. And I mean, it seems to me that that's the question. How can we use these systems and technologies and devices and so forth to genuinely improve the quality of life and not to diminish it? And the concern in the book is that we're by and large inadvertently allowing our devices to diminish the quality of our lives. And I suppose where the idea of technological optimism plays in here is that people are saying that these new technologies, yes, they appear to be diverging away from ordinary embodied human being. But that's just the next phase in evolution, and that we will adapt to this, and that new possibilities and prospects will open up as we do adapt. And there's a kind of optimism built into that view, which I don't share. I mean, I think no. I mean, that why would we do that?
Great. Dr. Gay, one of the critical parts of your argument, if I understand your book correctly, is that the diminishment of life is one of the chief accusations that you bring against at least the application of modern technology. How is it that you differentiate between diminishment and change or reshaping, some form of more neutrally stated reshaping? So one could say that certainly modern technology, the prevalence of the screen, etc., is changing our literacy. Is it destroying our literacy or replacing it with another form of literacy? Is technology diminishing our lives or simply reshaping our lives? How do you argue for your view, sir?
No, I mean, those are great questions, and I don't have great answers for them. I mean, I think there is research being done, and research that has been done about the differences, for example, how we take information in on screens over and against how we take information in text form. As far as I understand, the research seems to indicate that that it's better for us in terms of thought and retention to read words and take information in as text, that we don't process things in the same way and as deeply when we do this on screen. I don't know. I mean, that research is ongoing. The fulcrum that I use for my argument is, and the terms I use are ordinary embodied human being. Because it seems to me that the Christian religion places a very high value for a number of very good and substantial reasons on ordinary embodied human being. This is face-to-face interaction in real time, in real actual places. And so that's where I would argue that we ought to use our technologies to enhance that experience and not to diminish it.
Dr. Gay, the Christian doctrine of the incarnation, that is, that God's Son, Jesus Christ, became a flesh and blood man for the sake of our salvation, that must inform the Christian perspective on modern technology. How, in your view, does the incarnation shape our understanding of modern technology?
Well, I mean, this ties into what we were just talking about. The doctrines of the incarnation and the resurrection are, I was looking up synonyms to use here, enormous, resounding, unambiguous endorsements of embodied human being. These doctrines affirm that it is and that it will continue to be in ordinary embodied relationships with each other and with created nature, that human beings will be and will become most fully themselves. I mean, that's basic gospel theology. And so, I mean, here again, whatever we use our technologies for, we ought to use not only our technologies, but our energies, our imaginations, our capacity for innovation. We ought to use all of these things to enhance ordinary embodied human being, which is to say, to render our experience of ourselves, of each other, of created nature, more real, more vivid, more engaged. That, it seems to me, is that follows from the Christian affirmation of the incarnation and the resurrection.
Dr. Gay, this is on the side. I was speaking with one of my students. I teach at Moody Bible Institute, and I was recently speaking with one of my young students, and I was talking about how I thought I was waxing eloquent on how the incarnation must affect the way that we as Christians deal with technology. And my young student said, "Oh, I get it. So just as Jesus Christ came down and entered into our world and met us where we're at, so we as Christian missionaries need to go where people are at, which is online." What, it kind of took my breath away that someone would interpret the incarnation from that point of view. What should I have said to my student?
Well, I don't know. I'd have to think about that. I mean, it's interesting, I think, to remember that that isn't what Jesus did. That isn't what God does now in Christ, in the Holy Spirit. The experiences that most often have the largest impact upon us are real experiences with real people in real time. They're enfleshed. And you know, the fact that the risen Christ returns to encounter his disciples in the flesh prior to the ascension, and of course he promises to return in the flesh. You know, this has implications. This isn't just oh yeah, that happened, but it doesn't really matter. No, it happened, and it does matter, and I think it matters in precisely this sense of encouraging us to see how best to relate to each other. And I mean, I think it's probably true that we can take the gospel online. We can. Yeah, it is true that more and more people are spending more and more of their time online and in a virtual environment. And I think it's probably not a bad idea that we try and reach people in that environment in some way. But my sense would be that the purpose of doing that would be to call them back out of virtuality and back into reality.
Dr. Gay, what is your view of online education? Should seminaries and colleges, Christian seminaries and colleges, be doing this?
Well, I mean, the answer is yeah, probably. I mean, we do at Regent College, and I think it's probably on balance a good thing that we do. But I think we should never make the mistake of thinking that online education is as good as education that happens face-to-face in real places in real time. Now, of course, this isn't to say that the standard lecture model, you know, where professors sit up in front of the classroom and, well, the phrase is where professors pitch and students catch. It's not to say that that's ideal. But I think there are things that happen in places, in real time, and in face-to-face relationships that simply cannot be replicated online. Anyway, so I mean, my main point is to say, yes, but it's always a kind of second best. And whenever we can, we ought to encourage students and each other to encounter each other in face-to-face relationships.
Dr. Gay, what about virtual reality churches? Some of our viewers might think that I'm joking, but it's not a joke. Some churches now exist entirely in virtual reality, and I anticipate that this is something that only the early adopters are even thinking about right now, but give it a decade or two and this may become more of a genuine controversial question. What's your view on virtual reality church?
Well, I'm a little more unequivocal about this. I think this is a disaster. What are the reasons for it? That it's too much trouble to actually meet together? That we'd rather stay, quote, in the comfort of our own homes, unquote, as they say? I mean, I can't, I mean, I can imagine wanting to do this for the sake of people who, for a variety of reasons, cannot come to church. But I don't think that's the case for most of us. You know, and I think if we're going to put the word virtual in front of the word church, then I would say that we're going to need to remember to put it in front of a number of other words as well. Virtual fellowship, virtual discipleship, virtual obedience. And then finally, what would you make of the term virtual salvation? You know, I just don't think this makes sense ultimately. Now, again, can technology be used to communicate fellowship and worship to people that, you know, for whatever reason cannot come? Well, I'm sure it can, and why not? But when we allow our technologies to interpose themselves between us, then I think something's gone wrong. And that would seem to me to be the problem, the basic problem in this notion of virtual reality church.
Dr. Gay, if I can close with a question that we've been asking all of the guests on this program, and that is this: how can Christians today pursue the unity for which Jesus prayed in John 17?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. It's a beautiful question. I was reading the passage again this morning, and I don't know that I have a great answer to it, but I would say that the most important thing we can do is to pray. And to pray for a couple of things. To pray that we will not be of the world, because as Jesus also prays, the world does not know God. And also that we pray that we will know Christ, and that he will be in us, so that, as Jesus goes on to pray, we may be brought into complete unity. Yeah, I think this is something that Christ can realize in us as we open ourselves up to his presence in our lives.
It's been our delight today to be speaking with Dr. Craig M. Gay, author of Modern Technology and the Human Future, a Christian Appraisal, and professor of Interdisciplinary Studies at Regent College in Vancouver. Dr. Gay, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you very much, John.